How long have you been with us, Eleanor? Mr. Thorne's question hung in the sterile air of his modern, glass-walled office. Almost 30 years, I replied, my voice steady despite the sudden unease twisting in my gut. 30 years exactly, come Monday. Is that right? Marcus Thorne leaned back in his minimalist chair, the picture of corporate power. His tone was disturbingly casual, almost conversational. That's quite a tenure, quite an accomplishment. 29 years and 362 days, to be precise, I clarified. My stomach tightened further as I noticed the sleek tablet resting on his polished desk, displaying what looked like a formal document. In all my time at Sterling Dynamics, nearly 3 decades climbing the ranks, I'd never been summoned to the Vice President of Operations office on a Friday afternoon like this. Not for an emergency risk assessment meeting, as the calendar invite had claimed. Something felt profoundly wrong. I am Eleanor Vance, 59 years old. Until about 5 minutes ago, I was the senior risk management specialist at one of St. Paul's major advanced materials and components manufacturers. I've dedicated my career, the better part of my adult life, to ensuring Sterling Dynamics operated ethically and safely. I identified risks, documented procedural failures, and stood firm on compliance when others chased shortcuts around complex regulations. My pension, the cornerstone of my retirement plan, was set to fully vest on Monday, just 3 short days away. The finish line I had worked towards for so long, the security I had counted on, was finally within grasp. Mr. Thorne slid the tablet across the desk towards me. The screen glowed with dense legal text. As part of our ongoing restructuring for improved efficiency, he began, his words smooth and rehearsed. We've had to make some difficult decisions. He pointedly avoided my gaze. Your position has been eliminated. Effective immediately. The room seemed to waver, the hum of the building's ventilation suddenly loud in my ears. Restructuring, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Sterling Dynamics had just trumpeted record profits in the last quarter's shareholder report. He tapped the tablet screen impatiently with a manicured finger. This outlines your severance agreement. Standard terms, really? His eyes still wouldn't meet mine. You'll need to sign by close of business tomorrow, Saturday, or the offer is withdrawn. Ms. Jensen from HR will meet you at your desk to assist with your personal belongings. A wave of disbelief washed over me, so strong it almost buckled my knees. Anger should have followed, white-hot fury perhaps, or maybe the desperate urge to argue, to plead my case. Instead, a strange, cold clarity settled in my mind. My stomach clenched, recognizing the calculation behind the practiced indifference. This wasn't random corporate belt-tightening. This wasn't about efficiency, or my performance, which had always been exemplary. This was deliberate. This was timed precisely, maliciously, to fall just before my 30 years were complete, just before my pension rights became untouchable. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Thorne, I managed to say, my voice quiet but firm. I picked up the heavy tablet, its screen still displaying the insulting terms. I didn't scroll through the document. I didn't need to. Mr. Thorne seemed momentarily taken aback by my composure. Perhaps he had expected tears, shouting, a scene. But examining patterns, identifying risks, predicting outcomes, that had been my job for nearly 3 decades. This pattern was painfully, brutally clear. I stood, smoothed the fabric of my skirt, and turned towards the door. I walked out of his cold, glass office with my head held high, my dignity, at least, still intact. Clara Jensen, the senior HR manager, hovered awkwardly by my cubicle, her expression genuinely pained. She avoided the gaze of the uniformed security guard standing impassively nearby, clearly waiting to escort me from the premises. I began packing the few personal items that had accumulated over the years. The framed photo of my late husband, Richard, smiling beside a much younger Olivia. The ergonomic keyboard I'd brought from home to ease the long hours spent typing reports. The industry award plaque I'd received for contributions to risk management several years ago, a lifetime ago, it felt now. I didn't take much. My career wasn't contained in these few objects. Most of what truly mattered, the dedication, the sacrifices, the expertise, couldn't fit in the standard issue cardboard box they provided. I'm so sorry, Eleanor, Ms. Jensen whispered, her voice barely audible. She glanced nervously towards the waiting guard. This just isn't right. It is what it is, Clara, I replied, keeping my voice even. but inside, the cold realization churned. I knew better. This wasn't just wrong, it felt calculated, targeted, and quite possibly illegal retaliation. For the past 4 years, I'd been meticulously documenting serious issues. Falsified risk assessment reports that deliberately downplayed known defects in our advanced materials components. Internal audit results that seemed suspiciously manipulated. Emails and chat logs containing explicit instructions from management, including Mr. Thorne since his arrival 8 months ago. Directing staff to bypass established safety protocols to meet shipping deadlines. Evidence suggesting kickbacks embedded within certain supplier contracts. The irregularities had accelerated alarmingly since Mr. Thorne, the self-proclaimed efficiency expert, joined the company. I had flagged every concern, sent detailed memos up the proper channels, presented evidence in meetings. Each time, my reports were dismissed, buried under layers of bureaucracy, or returned with vague assurances or instructions to focus on less sensitive matters. My warnings had been ignored. Now, I was being silenced. As I walked through the familiar lobby for the last time, the security guard held the door open, his discomfort palpable. "Have a good weekend, Mrs. Vance," he mumbled, clearly hating his role in this corporate eviction. I offered him a polite, tight-lipped nod. "I believe I will," I replied, the words carrying more conviction than I felt at that moment. The drive home through St. Paul felt surreal, dreamlike. 30 years of dedication, loyalty, and professional integrity, erased in minutes. Reduced to a severance offer on a tablet and a cardboard box on the passenger seat. A gray, drizzling late autumn rain began to fall, blurring the familiar downtown skyline reflected in the Mississippi River. I drove past the cathedral where Richard and I had exchanged vows, past the school where Olivia had proudly received her diploma, toward the quiet neighborhood where I'd maintained our well-kept but modest house alone since Richard passed away 12 years ago. My mind replayed the countless sacrifices made for Sterling Dynamics. The late nights spent preparing risk assessments that few seemed to read, let alone act upon. Skipping Olivia's award ceremonies to meet urgent compliance deadlines imposed by others' poor planning. Investing my own time and money in certifications to stay ahead in my field. Believing it contributed to the company's strength and my own secure future. The family vacations cut short by sudden crises. The endless evenings reviewing complex documentation, searching for the patterns others missed. I had given Sterling Dynamics the prime years of my life, trusting in the promise of security that my fully vested pension represented. A promise they had just casually broken. When I pulled into my driveway, I switched off the engine but just sat there for a long moment, the keys still in my hand. The drizzle tapped rhythmically against the windshield. I finally allowed myself to feel the crushing weight of what had just happened. The injustice. The betrayal. Marcus Thorne had been with the company for only 8 months. He'd arrived with a reputation as an efficiency expert, a corporate fixer known for aggressive restructuring, which, in my experience, usually meant ruthless cost-cutting and downsizing, regardless of the human or ethical toll. I'd sensed from the beginning that his results at any cost approach would eventually clash with my duties as a risk management specialist. Our conflict came to a head recently when I refused to sign off on his latest efficiency initiative. A measure that involved bypassing several critical safety checks for a new component line. Skirting dangerously close to violating regulatory requirements and endangering end users. I knew he wouldn't take my refusal well. What I hadn't fully anticipated was the sheer speed and brutality with which he would move to eliminate me, the obstacle to his plan. Inside the quiet house, the air felt heavy. I made myself a cup of tea, the familiar ritual strangely comforting, and sat down at my kitchen table. The tablet lay dark on the polished wood surface. Finally, I picked it up and accessed the severance agreement. The terms were even more insulting than I'd anticipated. 2 months' salary. That was it. In exchange, I had to sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement (NDA) preventing me from ever discussing my employment or the reasons for my termination. I had to waive all rights to future claims against Sterling Dynamics. My pension, just days from vesting, was gone. Healthcare continuation was available only through Cobra, at an exorbitant personal cost. No acknowledgement of nearly 3 decades of dedicated service. Just a paltry sum of money and a legal muzzle, designed to buy my silence and bury the truth. And the deadline loomed, signature required electronically within 24 hours. By 5 p.m. tomorrow. They were counting on my fear, my desperation, the sudden shock of unemployment at 59, to force me into signing quickly, without thinking. Without consulting legal counsel. This wasn't standard procedure for a company like Sterling Dynamics. This was a calculated, targeted strike designed to rob me of what I had rightfully earned and to ensure I couldn't expose the risks I knew existed. A cold anger began to replace the shock. I set the tablet aside, the insulting offer still glowing on its screen. I walked down the hall to my home office, a room filled with years of professional life. Behind a row of family photo albums on the bookshelf sat my home safe. My insurance policy against exactly this kind of corporate malfeasance. For the past 4 years, ever since the irregularities started becoming too blatant to ignore, my professional instincts, honed over decades, had screamed that something was deeply wrong at Sterling Dynamics. Trusting that instinct, I had begun securing evidence. Not just physical copies of key documents, but digital trails as well. I opened the safe and retrieved the encrypted external hard drive stored within. I also accessed my secure cloud storage account, protected by multi-factor authentication. My meticulous nature, often perceived as mere fussiness by others, had compelled me to preserve records. I hadn't done it with the intention of becoming a whistleblower, but simply because my professional ethics demanded documentation. And my gut told me these records might one day be crucial. I spent the next hour reviewing the contents, my anger solidifying into resolve. Falsified risk assessment reports, systematically minimizing known defects in critical components supplied to aerospace and medical clients. Manipulated internal audit results that painted a rosy picture while ignoring red flags. Email chains and saved chat logs containing direct instructions from Mr. Thorne and others in management, ordering staff to bypass established safety protocols and quality checks. Spreadsheets hinting at kickbacks disguised as consulting fees in major supplier contracts. It was all there. Systematically organized, cross-referenced, and backed up. Years of evidence pointing to systematic fraud and endangerment, a pattern that had escalated dramatically under Mr. Thorne's leadership but clearly had roots predating his arrival. I had reported issue after issue through the designated internal channels. Risk Management Division reports. Formal memos. Requests for meetings. Each attempt was met with deflection, denial, or outright dismissal. I was told I was overly cautious, not seeing the big picture, or that the issues were being handled at a higher level. They had silenced my voice within the company, but they couldn't erase the data. I picked up my phone, my hand steady now. I scrolled through my contacts to a name I hadn't called in years, but one I knew I could trust. Julian Carmichael. Julian had been Sterling Dynamics' chief strategy officer before leaving several years ago, disillusioned by the shifting corporate culture, to take a position at the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA. He had always valued my analytical skills and respected my unwavering commitment to ethical practice, even when others found my diligence tedious. He understood the complexities of the industry and the importance of regulatory compliance. He would know what to do. It's time, I thought, the decision settling firmly within me. My finger hovered over his name on the screen, then pressed down decisively. The next morning, Saturday, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose, the initial shock replaced by a cold, clear determination. My conversation with Julian the previous evening had lasted nearly 2 hours. He had listened intently, his sharp mind immediately grasping the gravity of the situation as I outlined my termination, the suspicious timing, and the nature of the documentation I had gathered. His response was measured, professional, but underscored with a quiet fury. "This isn't just wrongful termination, Eleanor," he'd stated grimly. "Based on what you're describing, the systematic downplaying of safety risks, the potential fraud, the timing related to your pension, Sterling Dynamics could be facing serious regulatory violations, possibly even criminal charges. The pension issue might just be the tip of the iceberg." He explained the whistleblower protections available through FINRA and had already arranged for me to meet with a specialized investigative team at their regional office first thing Monday morning. "Do not sign anything they send you," he had cautioned sternly before hanging up, "and secure every piece of that documentation immediately. Multiple backups, off-site if possible." I dressed carefully in the navy blue suit I reserved for important meetings, feeling as though I were donning armor for battle. In a way, I was. This wasn't just about my job or my pension anymore, it was about accountability and the potentially dangerous consequences of the risks Sterling Dynamics was taking. I spent the entire morning meticulously organizing the evidence, digitizing the few remaining physical documents, cross-referencing emails, reports, internal chat logs, and financial records, creating a detailed timeline of events, complete with hyperlinks pointing directly to the relevant evidence files stored securely on multiple encrypted drives and cloud platforms. I even prepared a concise summary presentation outlining the key findings, anticipating the questions the FINRA investigators would likely ask. The methodical work kept my mind focused, channeling the potent mix of anger and hurt into productive action. By noon, I had 3 identical sets of the core digital evidence prepared on separate encrypted drives, plus secure cloud access. One for FINRA, one for my own records, stored off-site, and one that would eventually go to my attorney, serving as leverage if needed. My phone began to ring intermittently throughout the afternoon. Caller ID showed Ms. Jensen from HR. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was brief, expressing concern and asking me to call her back. Then, Mr. Thorne called. Twice. His voicemails grew increasingly impatient, demanding to know if I had signed the electronic agreement yet. Later, a formal email arrived from Sterling Dynamics' chief legal officer, stressing the 5 p.m. Saturday deadline and bluntly stating that failure to sign would result in the forfeiture of the entire severance offer. Their mounting pressure, their desperation, only confirmed what Julian and I suspected. They knew they were vulnerable. They knew what I had documented. They needed my signature on that NDA, my silence secured, before the weekend was over. Before I had time to seek legal counsel or contact regulatory bodies. They weren't just firing me, they were trying to bury the evidence along with my career. At precisely 4:30 p.m., my doorbell chimed insistently. Peeking through the peephole, I saw him. Mr. Thorne stood on my porch, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit that looked jarringly out of place in my quiet, middle-class neighborhood. His luxury SUV idled at the curb. I remained silent, unmoving, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Eleanor," he called through the heavy oak door, his voice tight with irritation. "I know you're in there." Silence. He rang the bell again, longer this time. He even had the audacity to peer through the sidelight windows. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking. "Just sign the damn papers electronically. We can put this behind us and all move on." I watched, unseen, as he finally gave up. He didn't place an envelope in the mailbox. Instead, he leaned a branded Sterling Dynamics overnight courier envelope against my front door before stalking back to his SUV and driving away with a squeal of tires. Only after his car disappeared down the street did I retrieve the envelope. Inside was another printout of the severance agreement, identical to the one on the tablet. Attached was a curt, handwritten note on Mr. Thorne's personal letterhead, "Final opportunity. Accept electronically by 9 a.m. Monday. Or this offer is permanently rescinded." His desperation was palpable. That evening, my daughter Olivia called from Chicago for our usual weekly chat. I tried to sound normal, but she immediately sensed something was wrong. "Mom? What's going on?" she asked, concern sharpening her voice. "You sound different." Stressed. I briefly considered downplaying the situation, shielding her from the ugliness of it all. But Olivia was 28, a sharp graphic designer, and she deserved the truth. Besides, I needed her support, even from afar. "They terminated me yesterday, Liv," I said, the words still feeling unreal. "What?" Her voice rose in disbelief and anger. "Sterling Dynamics fired you?" "But Mom, your pension. You're literally days away." "They can't do that." "They did," I replied, keeping my voice calm despite the tremor I felt inside. "But don't you worry. I have a plan. I'm handling it." "Do you need me to come home?" she asked immediately, her protective instincts kicking in. "I can book a flight out of O'Hare tomorrow morning. I can help organize things, be there for the meeting on Monday." Her offer warmed me, but I knew I needed to face this next step alone initially. No, sweetheart, stay put for now, I reassured her. Thank you, but I need to handle this first part myself. I've got Julian Carmichael helping. And I'm meeting with FINRA on Monday. I did, however, ask for her help remotely. Could you help me double-check the encryption and backup protocols for these files? Your tech skills are much better than mine. She readily agreed, expressing outrage at Sterling Dynamics and offering her unwavering support. After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room as darkness enveloped the house. The weight of the coming Monday pressed down on me. Meeting with FINRA. Formally becoming a whistleblower. For years, I had tried to address these critical risks internally, following protocol, believing in the system. Trusting in the integrity of the company I had served for so long. I had been loyal, discreet, and professional, even when my findings pointed towards serious, potentially deliberate, wrongdoing. I had given Sterling Dynamics every chance to do the right thing. But they, through the actions of men like Mr. Thorne and the apparent complicity or willful blindness of others in leadership, had made their choice. They had chosen to silence the messenger rather than address the dangerous message. Now, I would make mine. I would not be signing their insulting agreement. I would not be silenced by their threats or their inadequate severance offer. And most importantly, I would not allow them to discard nearly 3 decades of my professional life, endanger others through their negligence, and steal my hard-earned retirement without facing the consequences. Monday couldn't come soon enough. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, carrying a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The anxiety was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a resolute sense of purpose. I dressed meticulously in my navy suit, the fabric feeling like armor. I placed one of the encrypted hard drives containing the meticulously organized documentation into a secure briefcase. The drive downtown to the discreet FINRA regional office felt different today. The familiar St. Paul streets seemed sharper, more defined. The weight of what I was about to do, formally accusing my longtime employer of serious misconduct, sat heavily on my shoulders. But beneath the weight, there was also an unshakable conviction, a profound sense of rightness. The FINRA offices were understated but conveyed an air of quiet authority, frosted glass partitions, muted colors, hushed conversations. Julian met me in the lobby, his familiar face etched with a few more lines since his Sterling Dynamics days. But his eyes still held the sharp intelligence and integrity I remembered. "Eleanor," he said, his handshake firm and warm. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, but I'm glad you called." "It's good to see you too, Julian," I replied, feeling a surge of gratitude for his swift action. "Thank you for taking this so seriously." He led me back to a secure conference room where 2 other individuals waited. He introduced them as lead investigator Sarah Chan and financial analyst Ben Carter. Both greeted me with professional courtesy, their expressions serious but not unkind. "Ms. Vance," Investigator Chen began after introductions were complete, her voice calm and direct. "Before we begin, I need to confirm that you understand the process we are initiating today. Once you formally provide this information and evidence to FINRA, an official investigation commences. It becomes a formal matter. There's really no turning back from that point." I met her gaze directly, my resolve firm. "I understand completely," I stated clearly. "I'm ready." For the next 3 intensive hours, I walked them through everything. I detailed the systematic downplaying of product safety risks I'd first flagged years ago. I explained how internal controls were bypassed, often with managerial approval documented in emails I had saved. I showed them the manipulated audit trails designed to conceal these actions. I highlighted Mr. Thorne's direct instructions, captured in chat logs and emails, pushing for unsafe shortcuts to meet production targets since his arrival. I connected these internal failings to recent product recalls and customer lawsuits that Sterling Dynamics had tried to manage quietly. Ben Carter, the financial analyst, examined the documents related to supplier contracts and internal audits with growing concern, occasionally exchanging significant glances with Investigator Chan. "These discrepancies in the risk assessments versus the internal audit adjustments, they aren't minor oversights," he noted, tapping figures on his own tablet. "If these product defects were knowingly concealed from investors or regulators, The company has significant exposure. And you documented and reported these issues internally? Investigator Chen asked, her pen poised over a notepad. Multiple times. Over the past 4 years, I confirmed, accessing my summary file on the hard drive and projecting copies of dated memos, email chains with read receipts, and ignored meeting requests onto the conference room screen. Each time, I was either told the issues were being addressed, that I was misinterpreting the data, or simply that my concerns were noted. I paused, taking a steadying breath. When Mr. Thorne became VP of Operations 8 months ago, my reports started being rerouted directly to his office. From that point on, they simply disappeared without action or response, until I refused to certify his latest initiative last week. Julian leaned forward, his expression grim. And you believe your termination was directly related to your refusal and these accumulated reports? Without question, I stated firmly. The timing, just 3 days before my 30-year pension fully vested, makes their motive blatantly obvious. But more than that, I had recently flagged several major, potentially liability-creating issues with Mr. Thorne's latest cost-cutting plan. He needed me out of the way before I could escalate those concerns further, perhaps even outside the company. As our meeting concluded, Investigator Chen outlined the immediate next steps. We'll need a formal, detailed statement from you, Ms. Vance, which we can take this afternoon if you're willing. Then, based on the strength of this evidence, we will likely initiate a formal inquiry with Sterling Dynamics, requesting specific documents and potentially interviewing key personnel. This process typically remains confidential initially while we determine the scope and severity of potential violations. How long will an investigation like this usually take? I asked, the practicalities starting to surface. It varies depending on the complexity and the level of cooperation, she replied carefully. But given the detailed documentation you've provided and the clear pattern of potential misconduct relating to public safety and financial reporting, we may move on this quite quickly. I hadn't even made it back to my car in the parking garage when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Clara Jensen's number from Sterling Dynamics HR. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was trembling, laced with panic. Eleanor? Something is happening here. It's chaos. What is it, Clara? The board just called an emergency virtual meeting, effective immediately, she stammered. Mr. Thorne has been locked in his office all morning, refusing calls. And there are rumors that FINRA investigators contacted the chief legal officer just moments ago, requesting specific risk assessment files and audit reports going back 5 years. So it had begun. Even faster than I had anticipated. FINRA must have made immediate, official contact with Sterling Dynamics' legal team right after our meeting concluded. I'm not surprised, Clara, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. Did you? She hesitated, then lowered her voice to a whisper. Eleanor, did you report something? Is this because of you? I simply provided information that Sterling Dynamics leadership should have acted on years ago, I replied carefully, avoiding a direct admission. What's happening with my termination paperwork? My pension. That's the other reason I called, she exclaimed, her voice rising slightly in pitch. The executive committee is reviewing your termination right now. They've put everything on hold, the severance offer, your access being cut off, everything is frozen until further notice. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed the main switchboard number for Sterling Dynamics headquarters. The voice on the other end was instantly recognizable, though strained. Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the board. He was a man whose existence I was acutely aware of, but who had barely acknowledged mine during my nearly 3 decades at his company. Aside from perhaps a polite nod in the hallway, Ms. Vance, he began, his typically booming, confident voice sounding thin and tight. Mr. Sterling. It seems we, have a situation here that appears to require your input. Your perspective. The formality felt forced, unnatural. Would you perhaps be willing to come down to the office tomorrow morning? Say, 9 o'clock? To discuss matters. The request was ludicrous under the circumstances. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Sterling, I replied coolly, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside. Given the circumstances of my termination on Friday and the involvement of regulatory bodies, any further discussion should appropriately include my legal counsel. I paused deliberately. And potentially, representatives from the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority as well. I'm sure you understand the need for proper channels now. The silence on the other end of the line was profound, stretching for several long seconds. I could almost hear the frantic calculations happening in his head. Finally, he cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. I see, he stammered. Yes. Perhaps we can arrange something more formal then. Through counsel. As I ended the call, I felt no flicker of triumph, no satisfaction. Only a deep, bone-wearying exhaustion at the sheer, unnecessary waste of it all. I had never wanted to be a whistleblower. I had never sought conflict or public exposure. I had only ever wanted to do my job, the job Sterling Dynamics had paid me to do for 30 years, with diligence and integrity. I wanted to protect the company from unnecessary risks, ensure its compliance with the law, and then retire peacefully with the security I had diligently earned. But Sterling Dynamics, under its current leadership, had forced my hand. They had ignored my warnings, dismissed my expertise, and tried to discard me like disposable equipment just days before my retirement vested. Now, we would all face the consequences of their choices. My phone continued to buzz sporadically throughout the evening. Voicemails piled up from former colleagues, nervously seeking information. More calls came from executives, likely attempting damage control or trying to gauge what I knew and what I had done. I answered none of them. The time for quiet, internal conversations, for following the proper channels they had ignored, had definitively passed. Now, everything would unfold in the harsh, unforgiving light of regulatory scrutiny and public knowledge. By Wednesday morning, just 5 days after my dismissal, the storm had fully broken over Sterling Dynamics. Major financial news outlets like the Wall Street Journal Online and Bloomberg were running headlines about a FINRA inquiry into the company's risk management practices and potential disclosure violations related to product safety. Sterling Dynamics stock, already shaky after the previous day's volatility, plummeted sharply in morning trading. Financial analysts who had lauded Mr. Thorne's efficiency measures just weeks before were now publicly questioning the integrity of the company's internal controls and reporting structure. A formal letter arrived via courier from Sterling Dynamics' new interim chief legal officer. It officially withdrew my termination notice, confirming I was being placed on paid administrative leave with full benefits restored, pending the outcome of both an internal and the external investigation. It was a transparent, legally necessary attempt to mitigate damages, an action forced upon them, coming far too late to feel like vindication. At 10 a.m., my newly retained attorney, Vivian Sterling, no relation to the chairman, a coincidence that amused us both, accompanied me to a meeting. Vivian was a sharp, highly respected labor and employment attorney, introduced to me through a mutual friend. We had agreed to meet the Sterling Dynamics representatives on neutral ground, Vivian's well-appointed downtown law office. The atmosphere in the conference room was thick with tension. Arthur Sterling, the chairman, looked visibly diminished, having aged considerably in just a few days. He was flanked by the interim chief legal officer and 2 other board members, carefully chosen, I suspected, for their perceived distance from Mr. Thorne's operational decisions. Marcus Thorne himself was, as expected, definitively absent. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Ms. Vance, Ms. Sterling," Arthur Sterling began, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "We want to assure you, Eleanor, that we have initiated a comprehensive internal investigation into the serious concerns, the matters, you've brought forward." Before I could respond, Vivian spoke, her voice calm but cutting. "Let's be crystal clear, Mr. Sterling. Ms. Vance didn't just suddenly bring forward concerns after her retaliatory termination on Friday. She meticulously documented and repeatedly reported critical risk management failures and potential regulatory violations through official channels for several years, as her role as senior risk management specialist required. The company's documented failure to act on those warnings followed by the decision to terminate her employment mere days before her 30-year pension vested, strongly suggests a pattern of negligence, cover-up, and illegal whistleblower retaliation. Vivian paused, letting her words hang in the air. This raises serious questions about the board's oversight and potential personal liability for directors. Mr. Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair, avoiding Vivian's direct gaze. Yes, well, that is certainly part of what our internal investigation, with independent counsel, will thoroughly examine, he stammered. But I want to personally assure Ms. Vance that her termination has been formally rescinded. We consider her an employee in good standing, effective immediately, with all salary and benefits fully reinstated, retroactively, including my full, vested pension rights as of next Monday? I asked directly, my voice steady. Yes, of course, naturally, he replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. Your 30 years of service are valued. In fact, he added, attempting a magnanimous tone, the board is prepared to offer you a significant role going forward. Perhaps a consulting position after your planned retirement? We would greatly value your expertise in helping us, strengthen our procedures. My client will not be discussing any future arrangements or making any decisions today, Vivian interjected smoothly, cutting him off. Any settlement conversation must be preceded by a full and transparent accounting of how Ms. Vance's prior documented concerns were ignored, suppressed, or overridden. And by whom? She held up a hand as the interim CLO started to speak. Furthermore, any resolution must fully address the damages caused by this illegal termination, including punitive damages for retaliation against a whistleblower. The meeting continued for another hour, largely consisting of the board members attempting to distance themselves from Mr. Thorne's actions and the specific risk management failures I had documented. They painted themselves as victims of misinformation provided by Mr. Thorne, expressing profound shock and disappointment at the apparent misconduct he had overseen. I remained mostly silent, allowing Vivian to handle the pointed legal arguments, while I observed their body language, their shifting eyes, their carefully worded deflections. These were powerful men, individuals I had worked alongside, albeit at a distance, for much of my career. Yet, they had never truly seen me, never truly valued the critical function I performed. Until my meticulously documented warnings threatened their positions and the company's reputation. Now, suddenly, they couldn't look away. Their expressions were a potent cocktail of fear, feigned contrition, and a grudging, newfound respect born of necessity. As Vivian and I prepared to leave, Mr. Sterling made one final, desperate appeal. Eleanor? Ms. Vance, we are hoping, that is, the board hopes, you might consider speaking positively with the FINRA investigators about the corrective actions we are now implementing. Your support in demonstrating our commitment to reform would be invaluable to restoring confidence. I stopped at the door and turned to face him directly, meeting his anxious gaze for the first time during the meeting. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice low but carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. I dedicated nearly 30 years of my professional life to managing risks and ensuring compliance at Sterling Dynamics. During that time, I filed dozens of formal risk reports documenting serious irregularities. I sent countless memos specifically addressing the very issues now under investigation. I requested numerous meetings with executive leadership, including yourself and members of this board, to discuss these escalating concerns. Most were ignored. The few that were granted resulted in no meaningful action. I let the weight of that history settle in the room. At what precise point in that long history, Mr. Sterling, did I ever have your support? Or the support of this board? He stared back, speechless, his face paling. I will cooperate fully and truthfully with both your internal investigation and the FINRA inquiry, as my professional ethics have always dictated. I continued calmly. But I will be speaking only to the facts, presenting the documented evidence as I always have. Whether those facts ultimately support or damage Sterling Dynamics will depend entirely on the truth they reveal. And on the substantive actions you take now, not on the assurances you offer in this room. Vivian and I walked out, leaving the stunned board members in silence. As the conference room door closed behind us, Vivian squeezed my arm gently. "They understand the leverage you hold now," she whispered, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Let them sweat." It wasn't until we reached the elevator that I allowed myself to take a deep, shuddering breath. The adrenaline that had surged through me during the confrontation began to recede, leaving me feeling drained but strangely clear-headed. This wasn't victory. Not yet. This was merely the beginning of accountability, forced upon them by circumstance. "What happens now?" I asked Vivian as we stood beside our cars in the parking garage a few minutes later. "Now," she replied, her expression thoughtful, "now they scramble to contain the damage and negotiate a settlement with FINRA. While simultaneously trying to negotiate a separate settlement with us to avoid a protracted wrongful termination and whistleblower lawsuit." She gave me a reassuring look. "But make no mistake, Eleanor. They know the power of the evidence you hold. They are terrified of what else might come out." I shook my head slowly, the weight of the situation still heavy upon me. "They're not terrified of me, Vivian," I corrected softly. "They're terrified of the truth. There's a difference." Vivian nodded, her gaze steady. "There is indeed," she agreed. "And that difference, that commitment to the truth you've shown, is precisely why you'll ultimately prevail in this. Regardless of how it plays out legally." As I drove home alone, the city lights reflecting on the rain-slicked streets, I wondered what Richard would have thought of all this. My practical, steadfast late husband had always encouraged my meticulous nature, my sometimes obsessive attention to detail. Even when others found it frustrating or unnecessary. "Your focus isn't a quirk, Eleanor," he used to say with a gentle smile. "It's your superpower." Perhaps, after all these years, he had been right all along. By the following Friday, exactly 1 week after my abrupt termination, the story had exploded into a full-blown corporate scandal. FINRA had issued formal, extensive requests for information from Sterling Dynamics, signaling a deep and serious investigation. An internal memo, leaked almost immediately to the press, announced Marcus Thorne's immediate termination for cause. Sterling Dynamics stock had shed nearly 30% of its value over the week, triggering alarm bells among major investors and lending institutions. I was no longer just Eleanor Vance, the overlooked senior risk management specialist summarily dismissed before her retirement. Business journals and financial news sites now referred to me, cautiously at first, then more definitively, as the Sterling Dynamics whistleblower. The woman whose actions had exposed potentially dangerous practices at the manufacturing giant. The sudden, unwelcome media attention felt intrusive and uncomfortable. I avoided reading most of the coverage, focusing instead on cooperating fully with the FINRA investigators. They had now established a temporary base in a separate office building near Sterling Dynamics headquarters. Poring over the mountains of data I had provided and subpoenaing gigabytes more directly from the company. The evidence I'd meticulously collected over 4 years had opened the initial doors, confirming my long-held suspicions. But the formal investigation, with FINRA's broader reach and resources, was rapidly revealing even more troubling patterns. Stretching back further than even I had realized. Julian called late one afternoon to give me a discreet update on their progress. "Eleanor, it's actually worse than we initially thought," he said, his voice grave. "The manipulation of risk data and the deliberate concealment of safety issues, it goes back at least 5 years, well before Thorne arrived. He definitely accelerated it, made it more blatant, more reckless," Julian continued. "But he didn't start the fire. He just poured gasoline on it." "I suspected as much," I replied quietly, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest. There were always irregularities, whispers of things swept under the rug, especially around the time of that big acquisition 5 years ago. Issues I couldn't fully document because I lacked access to certain executive-level financial reports and strategic decision memos. "Well, we can access them now," Julian stated grimly. "And they paint a disturbing picture of systematic fraud. Apparently designed to inflate the company's value and minimize potential liabilities during critical reporting periods. The current board members are still claiming ignorance, pleading they were misled by previous management and then by Thorne. But based on the documents we've recovered, at least 3 of them, including Sterling himself, had to have known." Their signatures are on key documents approving transactions and strategies that relied on the falsified data. This news should have felt like complete vindication, confirmation of everything I had suspected and tried to warn them about. But instead, it just left me feeling empty, almost grief-stricken. The company I had dedicated the best years of my life to, the institution I had believed in and tried to protect, had been fundamentally corrupted at levels far deeper than even my cynical professional instincts had fully comprehended. The very people I had trusted to act on my warnings, the leaders responsible for setting the ethical tone, appeared to have been actively participating in, or at least willfully ignoring, the very misconduct I was reporting. That same afternoon, I received a call from Olivia. Her voice was tight with controlled fury. "Mom, have you seen the news feeds today?" she asked without preamble. "That snake Thorn. He's giving interviews, trying to discredit you." I hadn't seen, I admitted. I'd been deliberately avoiding the swirling media coverage, focusing instead on the official investigation and my discussions with Vivian about next steps. "What's he saying now?" "He's claiming you had a performance issues for years." Olivia sputtered, incredulous. "That you were bitter about being repeatedly passed over for promotion? And that this whole thing is just retaliation from a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. He's making it sound like you manipulated documents to frame him." I sighed. It wasn't surprising, merely depressingly predictable. It was the classic defense strategy: attack the whistleblower's credibility and motives rather than address the substance of the allegations. Smear the messenger. "It doesn't matter what lies he tells now, Liv," I assured her, trying to project a calm I didn't entirely feel. "The evidence, the emails, the reports, the audit trails, speaks for itself. My performance reviews have been consistently excellent for 29 years. They can't rewrite that documented history now." But Marcus Thorne, fighting for his reputation and potentially facing criminal charges, was certainly trying. By that evening, several news outlets, particularly those leaning towards sensationalism or siding with corporate narratives, had picked up his toxic narrative. Commentators began questioning my motives, suggesting I might have manipulated documentation or misinterpreted complex data out of spite. It was clearly a desperate, last-ditch move from a desperate man facing ruin, but it still stung deeply to see my professional integrity, the bedrock of my entire career, questioned so publicly and maliciously. Vivian called immediately, her voice sharp with strategic focus. "Eleanor, absolutely do not respond to any of it," she advised firmly. "No comments to reporters, no social media posts, nothing. It's just noise designed to distract and muddy the waters. FINRA is preparing to issue a formal statement tomorrow," she continued. "It will clarify your protected whistleblower status and underscore the credibility and volume of the evidence you provided voluntarily. Let the official channels handle this. Don't wrestle with pigs, you just get dirty, and the pig likes it." I wasn't planning to respond publicly, I told her truthfully. The thought of engaging in a public slanging match was nauseating. "But I am going to do something else. Something specific." The next morning, I drove to my local bank branch, bypassing the regular tellers and asking to speak directly with the branch manager, Tracy Ferguson. I'd known Tracy professionally for years. She handled most of Sterling Dynamics' local banking and payroll transactions. "Eleanor," she greeted me warmly, her expression sympathetic. "I've been following this awful news about Sterling Dynamics. How are you holding up through all this?" "I'm managing, Tracy, thank you," I replied politely. "But I need access to my safe deposit box, if possible." In the private viewing room. Inside the small, secure room, I unlocked the metal box and carefully removed a single, sealed envelope I had placed there 3 years prior. It contained hard copies of a specific, sensitive email exchange I had accidentally discovered while archiving old company files shortly after Julian had left Sterling Dynamics. The emails, dating back nearly 5 years, were between Mr. Thorne's predecessor and 2 long-standing board members, including Arthur Sterling himself. They discussed, in coded but still damning language, various strategies for managing financial appearances, and optimizing risk profiles. During a critically important acquisition period, effectively downplaying known issues to secure favorable terms. At the time, I hadn't fully grasped the implications, but something about the furtive tone had troubled me deeply. My instincts screamed at me to preserve these specific emails separately, outside the company's servers and my regular documentation files. So, I printed them, sealed them, and placed them in my personal safe deposit box, a deep contingency I hoped never to use. I hadn't included these specific emails in my initial report to FINRA because they weren't directly related to Mr. Thorne's more recent blatant safety violations. They represented a different layer of potential deception. But now, with Thorne and potentially members of the board attempting to rewrite history and paint me as a vindictive liar, these older emails provided crucial, irrefutable context. They demonstrated that problematic practices and a culture of concealing inconvenient truths predated not only my recent flags about Thorne but possibly Thorne himself. They implicated the very leadership now claiming ignorance. Standing there in the quiet chill of the bank vault's viewing room, I called Julian Carmichael immediately. "Julian, it's Eleanor," I said, my voice low but firm. "I have something else. Something you and Investigator Chin need to see right away. It potentially changes the narrative completely. It goes right to the top." As I drove from the bank to meet him at a neutral location, I felt no satisfaction, no vengeful glee. Only a heavy certainty that the full truth, in all its uncomfortable complexity, would now inevitably emerge. Regardless of who it ultimately implicated. The emergency board meeting at Sterling Dynamics headquarters was convened for Monday morning, 10 days after my termination. 7 days after the FINRA investigation became public knowledge. I wasn't invited, of course. I didn't need to be there. The additional documentation I had provided late the previous week, the 5-year-old emails from the safe deposit box, had landed like a bombshell within FINRA and, subsequently, within Sterling Dynamics' panicked legal team. It dramatically accelerated the investigation, shifting the focus beyond Mr. Thorne's reckless actions to a much longer pattern of potential financial manipulation and disclosure failures involving senior leadership, including board members. Julian called me discreetly on my personal cell phone. Speaking quietly from just outside the boardroom doors where the emergency meeting was underway. "It's absolute chaos in there, Eleanor," he reported, his voice hushed but charged with intensity. "The FINRA enforcement team just presented their preliminary findings, including the implications of those older emails you found. It blew apart the board's unified defense. 3 board members, including the 2 implicated in those emails with Thorne's predecessor, resigned on the spot," he continued. "Arthur Sterling is trying to hang on, claiming he was merely following advice, but no one is buying it. Thorne, I hear, is desperately trying to cut a deal, claiming he was just continuing established practices he inherited. No one's buying that anymore either. The evidence trail is too clear." By noon, Sterling Dynamics issued a terse press release. It announced a major leadership restructuring, effective immediately, and pledged full cooperation with all regulatory authorities. The carefully worded statement confirmed the immediate resignation of 4 long-serving board members, including the chairman, Arthur Sterling. It also formally confirmed the termination of Marcus Thorne for cause, explicitly citing gross misconduct and violations of company policy. The company's stock, already battered, plunged another 12% on the news. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Clara Jensen from HR again, her voice subdued, almost weary. "Eleanor, the new interim CEO would like to meet with you tomorrow, if that's possible for you." The interim CEO, I learned, was Patricia Donovan, the former chief operating officer. Patricia was someone I knew professionally. She had always treated me with distant but fair professional respect. Seemingly removed from the internal politics and Thorne's aggressive style. I agreed to the meeting but, on Vivian's strong advice, insisted it take place at my attorney's office, not on company ground. When Patricia Donovan arrived the next day, she looked exhausted but radiated a sense of grim determination. There were no preambles, no awkward pleasantries. "Eleanor," she began, her voice direct and carrying the weight of the crisis she had inherited. "I won't waste your time. Sterling Dynamics is in crisis, and frankly, you are at the center of it. She met my gaze squarely. Not because you did anything wrong, let me be clear. But because, it seems, you were the only one consistently trying to do what was right, while others failed. She slid a plain folder across the conference table, eerily similar in size and shape to the one Mr. Thorne had used to deliver my termination notice just 11 days prior, yet worlds apart in its content. This document officially rescinds your termination, retroactively reinstates your employment to ensure continuous service, and confirms the full, immediate vesting of your 30-year pension, she explained, her tone factual. It also outlines an additional compensation package, proposed by the reconstituted board. In recognition of the professional damages and personal difficulties you have unjustly experienced. I opened the folder slowly. Vivian leaned in beside me. The compensation package was substantial. It included a lump sum payment equivalent to 5 years of my salary, full healthcare coverage for life, and a formal, written apology from the Sterling Dynamics Board of Directors for the wrongful termination and the failure to act on my previous reports. We are also establishing a new, independent corporate ethics and risk oversight division, reporting directly to the board, Patricia continued. We would be honored if you would consider helping us design its framework and protocols, perhaps as a paid consultant after your retirement. Whenever you choose that to be. Your experience and integrity are precisely what this company needs to rebuild trust. I closed the folder quietly, making no comment on the consulting offer for now. And Mr. Thorne? I asked, my voice even. And the board members involved? Patricia's expression hardened perceptibly. Criminal charges are expected to be filed against Mr. Thorne and at least one former executive by federal prosecutors, she stated flatly. FINRA sanctions are also anticipated. Sterling Dynamics will not be providing or funding any legal defense for those individuals. Justice, it seemed, or at least accountability, had finally, irrevocably arrived at Sterling Dynamics. 6 months later, I sat quietly in the gallery of a federal courtroom. I watched as Marcus Thorne, looking diminished and stripped of his former arrogance, stood beside his attorney and entered a guilty plea to charges of wire fraud and conspiracy related to misleading investors about product safety risks. Another former executive pled guilty to similar charges the following week. Arthur Sterling, the former chairman, avoided trial through a deferred prosecution agreement, accepting a hefty fine and a permanent ban from serving as an officer or director of any public company. Thorne's eyes flickered towards the gallery as he was led out. Our gazes met briefly across the crowded room. I saw a flicker of recognition there, not of me personally, perhaps, but of what I represented, the unavoidable, personified consequences of his calculated recklessness and greed. The Sterling Dynamics scandal became a widely cited case study in corporate governance failures. The critical importance of robust internal risk management, and the vital role of protected whistleblowers in ensuring accountability. I politely declined the consulting position offered by the reorganized Sterling Dynamics. Instead, I accepted an advisory role on a nonprofit corporate ethics council, sharing my experiences to help other companies strengthen their own oversight. My story, once publicized through the legal proceedings, quietly inspired other compliance and risk officers in various industries to step forward with their own concerns, creating small but significant ripples of change. FINRA eventually granted me a substantial whistleblower award, a percentage of the significant penalties assessed against Sterling Dynamics, combined with my now fully secured pension and the settlement Vivian had negotiated. I found myself with more financial security than I had ever imagined possible. With part of those funds, I established a scholarship fund dedicated to supporting women pursuing careers in business ethics and risk management. I named it the Richard Vance Memorial Scholarship for Ethical Leadership in Business, a tribute to my late husband's unwavering belief in my superpower. Olivia didn't relocate permanently from Chicago, but she visited St. Paul frequently, taking an active role in helping me manage the scholarship fund's website and outreach. I sold the house, which felt too large and empty now, and bought a comfortable, manageable condo overlooking the Mississippi River, enjoying the freedom to travel and reconnect with friends. We often spent weekends together, sometimes here, sometimes in Chicago, building new memories. Reclaiming some of the time lost to those decades of long hours and corporate demands. One crisp autumn evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the river flow placidly below, Olivia asked a question that caught me slightly off guard. "Mom, looking back at everything, the stress, the fight, the betrayal, was it worth it?" I considered her question carefully, sipping my tea. "Doing the right thing rarely feels easy at the time, Liv," I answered finally, meeting her thoughtful gaze. "Fighting for accountability. For integrity, it takes a toll." There were moments I felt utterly alone, moments I doubted everything. I looked out at the darkening water, the city lights beginning to twinkle. But sleeping soundly at night, knowing you stood firm on your principles, knowing you didn't stay silent when silence was dangerous? That peace of mind. I turned back to her, a faint smile touching my lips. "That, sweetheart, is always worth it." Olivia nodded slowly, understanding passing between us, wordlessly. She knew. She had seen my struggle, my resolve, my exhaustion, and ultimately, my quiet vindication. Perhaps that, I realized, was the most meaningful outcome of all. Not the financial security, welcome as it was. Not even the public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but the knowledge that my difficult choices had shown my daughter, by example, what it truly meant to stand firm in your values, especially when, it costs you something significant. As for Sterling Dynamics, the company survived, albeit significantly restructured and diminished after paying hefty fines and settlements, under Patricia Donovan's determined leadership. They seemed genuinely committed to implementing stringent new compliance protocols and fostering a culture of transparency. They still sent me their annual reports. Perhaps it was a legal formality, perhaps a tacit reminder of the changes forced upon them, perhaps even a quiet, ongoing apology. I read them carefully each year, noting the improved risk disclosures and ethics statements with a sense of detached professional satisfaction. Some might choose to frame my story as one of revenge against a corporate giant that wronged me, but I have never viewed it that way. Revenge implies malice, an emotional need to inflict harm. My actions were driven by professional ethics and a commitment to documented facts. I simply did what I had always done throughout my career. I identified the risks, documented the truth, reported my findings through proper channels, and stood by the evidence. The only difference was that this time, finally, others were forced to listen. And the consequences followed the truth.